that was the end of that. I did tell a good friend about it years later. When we arrived in Pearl Harbor, an officer from the Office of Naval Intelligence came on board and debriefed each one of us independently of the others. I do not know what went on in the debriefings of the other personnel involved, but when I went in, he began to ask me what I saw. When I began to describe to him what I saw, he became very upset, even enraged. And having come from a military family, having a father who was an Air Force pilot and an officer, having served 4 years in the Air Force, I knew what this man wanted to hear. It was obvious to me. So I told him what he wanted to hear so that I didn't have to go through with what I knew I would have to go through if I told him anything else. So I told him, "Sir, I did not see anything. I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "That's the spirit." I had to sign a security oath. I was dismissed, told that I was a good sailor, had a good future with the Navy, and I left. On the way out, Seaman DiGirolamo was braced up against the bulkhead in the passageway, and I whispered to him, "Tell him you didn't say anything." And I don't know whether he did or not, because we never talked about it again amongst ourselves. Several years later, I was trained again. Well, in between this, I struck, or striking is what you call trying out for a certain particular job. I was striking for quartermaster, which is navigation. It's where you navigate whatever ship or vessel you're on. I made it, was promoted to third-class quartermaster. Eventually was promoted to second-class quartermaster. I was then trained by Naval Intelligence in my secondary NEC, which is 9545, which is internal security. I was then sent to Vietnam, where I was given a multi-million-dollar patrol boat. I was given 5 other lives to take care of and mother and be a friend to and be a daddy to and everything else, and was given a river and everybody that lived on both sides of that river and said, "Bill, go out and kick their butts. And while you're out there, try to collect as much intelligence as you can, try to learn as much as you can from the local people, try to make friends with them, keep the river safe and secure, etc., etc., etc." While I was there, I learned that there was much UFO activity in Vietnam, an awful lot of UFO activity. They were called in official reports helicopters, enemy helicopters. Well, anyone who knows anything about Vietnam, if you look in documents released about Vietnam under the Freedom of Information Act, you will find many reports of any enemy helicopters attacking our troops, attacking the enemy's troops, taking villagers away from their villages. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, North Vietnam had no helicopters, period. It was really UFO activity. When I came back to the United States, I was assigned to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet and was specifically assigned to the intelligence briefing team for Admiral Bernard Clary, who at that time was the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet. While serving in this official capacity, I had occasion to prepare briefings on flaps. You know what a flap is? I mean, something's happening right now, and it's very important, and everybody's concerned about it, and all the admirals are in the command center, and they want to know what the hell is going on, and they want up-to-date information, and they want the plots correct, and they want to know who's over here, and what's the closest ship, and how fast can we get a United States Marine unit there. That's what you call a flap. In other words, everybody's throwing it all in the fan, and it's all coming out on me and the other people who were with me. It was our job to provide this information on a 24-hour basis. And specifically every day, we would come in very early in the morning, about 4 a.m., and we would prepare a briefing which took place at between 8 and 9 o'clock, whenever the Admiral was ready, because we didn't tell him when to be there. He told us when he was there, and when he was there, we had to be ready. Between 8 and 9 o'clock, usually, we would present a briefing to the Admiral and his chiefs of staff. Now, you have to remember that this man had reason to know what was going on in half of the world, because he's literally responsible for the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean and everything in between, including the land masses. In case of a nuclear attack or nuclear war or any kind of a war, it is the United States Navy that will deal the primary blow to the enemy, will deliver the war to the enemy first, and will usually carry it through to the end. And that is the truth. So he had the need to know everything that happened in that part of the world. When alien-connected incidents occurred, we would get top secret messages marked magic, restricted information. That is not an obsolete security classification. And the first time it was used was not in the Nixon years. It has been used on alien-connected material since the beginning. So don't believe everything you hear. When we got these messages, usually all hell would break loose. It was of the utmost importance. When we were briefing officers who were new in the position that they had the need to know regarding this flaps, we sometimes had to brief them on the history that led up to this incident. So then I had access to documents containing the history. Until eventually I found in my hands a document called Operation Majority and another document called Project Grudge, which contained the most astounding information I have ever seen in my life. And from that day forward, my life has never been the same. It has not been normal in any way, and I wish that it had been somebody else who had seen the information. But because no one else has had the guts to stand up and talk about what they've seen, I'm kind of glad that it was me, because I do have, and I will continue. Because you need to know what was in those documents and what's happening. Now, if I had not seen the UFO with my own eyes first, I would have thought that this whole scenario that I saw in these documents was a hoax. Not perpetrated by the Navy or the Office of Naval Intelligence or the United States government to fool me or to fool anybody else in the Navy. I would have thought it was a hoax after I had read Operation Majority that outlined the plans for the secret government, the secret world government, to come into power. I would have thought that it was a hoax to scare you into bringing that about. And I still think that they're going to use it to try to bring it about. And I want to warn you beforehand not to believe a word they tell you when they tell you there's going to be an invasion from outer space. Because there's not going to be. It's already taken place. Because I saw what I saw on board that submarine, and because of the research that I've conducted since then, I know that it's real. It's not a hoax. It's not something to propel this world government into position. It's real. There's aliens here. They're just as real as you and I. And I'm here to tell you about it. And there are other people talking about it, and there have been throughout the history of this thing, only, especially in the early years, anybody who tried to talk were killed, were sent to mental institutions, just flat disappeared and they never knew what happened to them. Or all of a sudden, Joe Blow was working in a garage and now he's got a nice job in the government, making 3 times what he was making in that garage, and he doesn't talk to you anymore. Those things were commonplace. They have still been commonplace up to the present time, except in recent years, people are starting to learn how to prevent it from happening. And one of the ways is you get squarely in front of the public and you stay there. Because I'm going to tell you this right now, and you can bank on it. You watch me every day of my life. If anything happens to me, you don't have to do any more research. You know damn well everything I'm telling you is true. And they don't want you to know that. So they're not going to touch me unless they can make it look like an accident where you will believe that it's an accident. And I'm telling you right now, they know how to make people die of heart attacks, strokes, brain hemorrhages. They know how to make people fall down the stairs. They know how to make people commit suicide, or at least look like they committed suicide. And if you don't believe that, look at what happened to the 20 material witnesses who were close enough to the car to see William Greer shoot President Kennedy within 2 years of the time it happened. They're all dead. The odds of them all being dead is something like 300,000 trillion to 1. Some of them apparently, I say apparently because that word means that's what it looks like, committed suicide. One died of a karate chop to the neck. Several of them had heart attacks, etc., etc., etc. One man hung himself. They were all murdered. All of them. They were murdered by the Central Intelligence Agency. William Greer was the assassin who killed President Kennedy. He was a Secret Service agent. I'm going to show you the film here shortly. Many of you wonder, well, if that's really true, how come Jackie Kennedy never said anything? If the Secret Service, the highest protective body in the United States assigned to protect the President of the United States, just shot President Kennedy, who in the hell is she going to tell? Me? I can't do anything except tell you. The FBI? J. Edgar Hoover is one of the men who ordered his assassination. He was a member of MJ-12. Beginning to see the picture? The picture's not a pretty one. What has happened is these men who throughout history have been trying to figure out how they can control the world, all of a sudden discovered how they could do it. In 1952, President Truman, together with the heads of state of the European nations and the Soviet Union, formed what is known as the Bilderbergers, to coordinate the international efforts to protect the world from an invasion from outer space, should these aliens turn out to have that as their ultimate goal. The Bilderbergers, as MJ-12 did, soon learned how to wrest power behind the scenes and use the world banking families to manipulate and leverage these nations so that they are really in control of the world, and they are headed by the 9 heads of the families that own most of the wealth of the world, known as the Round Table of 9. Under them, each nation has a group of men secretly controlling that nation. And I don't mean every nation in the world, I mean the nations that count, the hard currency nations, have an organization which is a sister organization to MJ-12 within that country's respective government. How does this work, you say? How can a secret organization such as MJ-12 control the government? It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. If you will remember that President Eisenhower formed this secret group in 1954. He was the last president who knew everything. They began in 1954 to issue secret executive orders in the form of NSC memos to wrest power away from the president and effectively isolate the president. They took the power to appoint appointees in the government away from the president. And if the president wants to appoint someone whom they don't want him to appoint, they have a way of embarrassing the president to get him back into line, or getting rid of him altogether, or making sure that he doesn't get elected if he's not willing to play the game. The result has been, ladies and gentlemen, that today every major member of the United States government is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, or the Trilateral Commission, but usually the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. They usually have dual membership. Every one of them, not just a few. You see, it started off in 1954, there were just a few. Truman's years, there were hardly any. Eisenhower got in, he was a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He appointed some. After that, when they took the power to appoint on themselves, they told the president who to put in those positions, and that's who got those positions. And today, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission is the government. The government is not representing us. They are representing the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and the secret world order. Please, when you go out of this room, look it up yourself. Because if I hear from you that you don't believe it, I'm going to say, did you check on what I said? Did you go to your library? Did you pick up the bibliography that we left for you on that table? Did you go read those books? If you tell me no, I don't want to hear what you have to say anymore. Because I can bring you a message, and I can tell you what that message is. I cannot march into battle by myself. I will be literally creamed. You must be beside me as I march, as Colonel Bo Greitz marches, as John Lear marches, as Bill English marches, as any of the other true patriots in this country are marching to try to clean up our government. Because we can't even begin to deal with an alien force because we don't have the power to make treaties. We don't have the power to make agreements. We don't even have the power to sit down and hold a discussion. We do have the power to get rid of the ones who are not representing us and put people in who are representing us and demand that the crooks be prosecuted and get thrown in jail. We have the power to clean up our government so then our government can represent us and then we can deal with an alien question. So what I'm telling you tonight is forget about the aliens because you cannot hope to deal with them until we clean up our government. Once we clean up our government, then we can deal with the other problems. Until then, we cannot. Because you can't make a treaty for me. And you can't make a treaty for her. And I can't make a treaty for any of you. It takes our government to do that. Now I want you to understand, I do not and never have advocated the overthrow of the United States government. I advocate the restoration of the United States government to its legal and proper place as our founding fathers laid out for us to follow. I advocate and will march and defend to the death the restoration of the Constitution of the United States of America. Because the Constitution of the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen, is the United States of America. We are not the United States of America. The state of Arizona and the state of Mexico, or New Mexico, is not the United States of America. All of the states and all the people together are not the United States of America. The United States of America is and only is the Constitution of the United States of America. That document is the only thing that keeps you free. That document is the only thing that gives you freedoms and guarantees them. That document is the only thing that keeps people from taking your freedom away from you, along with one of the clauses that they gave us in that document, which was the right to keep and bear arms. And I know that that issue is controversial, but let me explain to you why it is in the Constitution. In history, all throughout history, when a despot or a conqueror or a wicked person wanted to subjugate the people, If the people were unarmed, it was easy for them to do that. In fact, it was a foregone conclusion. The only thing that has prevented that from happening in the United States is the fact that most Americans throughout our history up until recently have always had at least a .22 rifle in the closet. And no one could ever successfully march against an armed population which believed in themselves. We've lost a belief in ourselves. We've lost an understanding of the Constitution. We've lost the meaning behind it. We don't understand what our country is. We don't understand what keeps us free. And the secret government is manipulating you daily into begging them to take away your freedoms. And some of you here in this room have been begging them to take away your freedoms. You've been asking them to take away your right to keep and bear arms, which is the only thing that keeps them from destroying the Constitution, declaring martial law, and forming this one world order right now. The only thing preventing that is the guns in our closets. That's all, because they would have done it years ago if it had not been for that. Many of you right now in this room have been screaming for the government to take away some of our freedoms in order to get the drugs off the streets. You've been saying, I'm willing to give up some of my freedom to get rid of this terrible plague. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is your government who imports those drugs and who is selling those drugs to your children, and has been from the very beginning. And the only ones that they ever catch or allow to be caught are those who are in competition with them. This operation was put into place in the late 50s. It was organized by George Bush in cooperation with the CIA while he was president and CEO of Zapata Oil. Their plan was to bring the drugs in from Central and South America to the offshore oil platforms of Zapata Oil, from there to bring them into the United States by the normal crew conveyance and helicopters. Therefore, they would not have to undergo inspection by custom officials or law enforcement agencies of any kind. And it's been going on ever since. Today, the drugs do not enter this country by the little planes that they would have you believe on the 6 o'clock news, nor by the little boats that they say are speeding across the Caribbean. The Coast Guard, ladies and gentlemen, and the United States Navy are not inept. Every aircraft that approaches the borders of this country from any direction is monitored minute by minute by the North American Air Defense Command. The drugs, ladies and gentlemen, are brought into this country on CIA proprietary contract aircraft and military aircraft, and land on CIA facilities in the United States and on military air bases, and Homestead Air Force Base is one of those bases where those planes land. Recently, Colonel James Boegreitz, in the last few years, went to the Golden Triangle area to try to bring back American prisoners of war who we know are still being held. We've always known it. The government has known it. They have misused the Office of Prisoner of War Accountability to transact these drug deals. So they don't want the prisoners of war to come home. Well, we didn't know that until Boegreitz went over there and talked to a gentleman by the name of General Kunsa, who is the drug overlord of the Golden Triangle. I've talked extensively with Colonel Greitz about this. I have all of his information. And coupled with mine, it paints a very bad picture. General Kunsa says that every year, government agents High-level government agents are purchasing 800 tons of pure heroin and shipping it into this country from him. He wants to stop it. He is willing to stop it. He wants us to give him a crop substitution program so that his people do not have to raise poppies and process heroin in order to survive. He wants to become a recognized, real nation rather than an illegal group of bandits living in the jungle. And George Bush and the United States government says there is no interest in doing that here. He's willing to stop 800 tons of pure heroin from coming into this country every year. And George Bush says, we're not interested in doing that here. Furthermore, we're not interested in hearing who these government officials are that he says he's selling these drugs to. Furthermore, Colonel Bogreitz, if you don't shut your mouth, we're going to lock you up in a federal prison and you're never going to get out. And they tried. You see, it was the United States government that sent Bogreitz to Southeast Asia to bring prisoners of war back. Colonel Bogreitz is the most decorated man to come out of Vietnam and one of the most decorated heroes that this country has ever had. They sent him in there because of that, and they gave him a lot of press. And every time he went in, they warned the enemy beforehand, usually by Radio Free America, in their own language, warned them by name who was coming, how they were coming, what route they were going to take, so that they would not be successful. But it made the administration look good because they were sending somebody over there to do it. But every time he went, he had to use a phony passport that the Department of Defense gave him to use to accomplish his mission. So I'm going to show you a short tape right now. I want you to pay a lot of attention to this, please.
We have the lights dim.
Yeah, it reflects right in the center. That one back there. One more.
On April 18, 1989, what many Americans regard as the most important trial in the United States began with little fanfare in Las Vegas, Nevada federal court. Although it was well covered by the local media, in stark contrast to the Oliver North trial, the national print and broadcast media were conspicuously absent. It was almost as if an invisible dome had descended over Las Vegas to prevent any satellite uplink from reaching the rest of the nation. For nearly 2 years, Lieutenant Colonel James Bogreitz had been under indictment for misuse of a passport. The charge had been leveled at Greitz as a result of a trip he made to Burma in 1986. U.S. government prosecutors have contended that Greitz lacked official sanction for his activities in Southeast Asia in pursuit of American POWs and missing in action. Greitz, one of the most highly decorated Green Beret commanders of the Vietnam era, has countered that he has been so charged in order to shut him up about his discovery in the Golden Triangle headquarters of General Kun Sa that high-level U.S. officials and intelligence operatives have been actively involved in massive drug smuggling for over 20 years.
And the final support was controlled given by Richard Armitage, who stayed in Vietnam at the time. And after the Vietnam War, Richard Armitage was a prominent narcotic personnel, prominent trafficker in Bangkok. Yeah, after the Vietnam War.
Countless attempts to place this evidence before Congress and the national media have been met with responses ranging from polite rebuffs to outright refusal. Repeatedly during the course of preparation for the trial, the 3 successive U.S. attorneys prosecuting the case stated that they would drop the charge if any evidence of official sanction for his travel had been presented. Although Greitz had offered testimony from several witnesses, including U.S. officials, verifying this, the judge attempted to exclude such testimony in preliminary hearings, even to the extent of issuing a gag order. To most knowledgeable observers of the case, it had become very clear by the start of the trial that this was indeed an official effort directed at the highest levels of the U.S. government to railroad Greitz.
We think that Bill Greitz is right, and that these charges against him are unjust. He's a great American hero.
The government says this case isn't about politics or foreign policy, but Greitz and his attorneys are trying to prove otherwise.
I'm glad that there's some facts before the public. It's not me on trial here, it's the government and their drug smuggling, and it's the prisoner of war issue. And it's been me who's been wanting to get this thing over with.
During opening arguments, Greitz's attorney Lamont Mills told the jury he won't dispute the government's charges. Mills admits Greitz did use a false passport when he returned to the country in late 1986, but he says the real story is why he did it. Greitz maintains the government sent him to Southeast Asia on a mission to find POWs, but the White House and the Pentagon deny any involvement.
I wanted to go to trial because this story needs to be told. I felt through a jury trial, a public trial, that the plight of the prisoners of war might be focused upon, and government involvement in drug smuggling to promote covert operations that Congress will not approve of should be focused upon.
The U.S. attorney says the case is not about politics, but about the simple misuse of a passport.
Hey, look, I got better things to do than prosecute Deer Can Commandos, I can promise you that.
What's your reaction to the government calling you a Deer Can Commando?
And I'm proud of it, worn the uniform of the United States. And anyone that say that, obviously, can't say the same.
Former Green Beret Bo Greitz has been acquitted on charges of using a phony passport. In federal court this morning, Judge Philip Crowe said he had no choice but to toss out the case. He says the government charged Greitz under the wrong statute.
Former Green Beret is 3 minutes tonight. The federal judge has thrown out a felony passport charge against him.
Federal Judge Phil Crowe dismissed the case against Greitz today, saying the government simply brought the wrong charge. Greitz says he's pleased with the judge's decision, but that he still has a story to tell about what's going on in Southeast Asia. It's not over until the prisoners of war home. It's not over until Richard Armitage is investigated and this government drug business is exposed. It's sweet and sour. No one likes to win a victory because the enemy fouls out. You don't even get a chance to take the field. At least according to the judge, we made a mistake. We should have charged a different statute. They were trying to say the case that they got watched, all right? And we know it, and we got him on it. We won. Case is over. He's acquitted, not guilty.
Mills told reporters that there was a lot of interest in this case from high places, referring to Washington.
George Bush called the what we did. That's right. I'm saying George Bush called me up and told me to get no right. George Bush called me up and told me to get no right. I'm saying George Bush called me up and told me to get no right. George Bush called me up and told me to get right. I'm saying George Bush called me up.
Such comments by a United States attorney following nearly 2 years of persecution of Lieutenant Colonel Greitz and the expenditure of many thousands of taxpayers' dollars are alarming. If Maddox's statements are true, the implications are profoundly disturbing. As the Iran-Contra scandal continues to unravel, revealing President Bush as more than a willing participant in numerous illegal activities, his direct interference in this case would seem to be a distinct possibility. Such behavior by our chief executive and his legal representative in the state of Nevada compromises our judicial system and violates long-cherished standards of American jurisprudence.
The government apparently hasn't given up on trying to convict Bo Brights. A grand jury is now apparently looking at brand new charges. The government is still after Green Beret Colonel James Bo Brights. A federal grand jury has subpoenaed samples of Brights' handwriting. Yesterday, illegal use of passport charges were thrown out against Brights because the government filed the wrong charges. Today, word leaked out that the grand jury had taken up the Brights case again, and that the Brights attorney, Lamont Mills, was hopping mad.
It is unethical, it is childish. If that's true, that breaches everything I know about the grand jury process. It shows someone who's embarrassed and humiliated because they did it wrong and their case was thrown out of court. If the man is guilty, let him come in with an indictment and let us go to trial and establish our case. But to release things to the press, when you just started an investigation, violates everything I know about the grand jury process in this country and the Constitution upon which it's founded, and I'm mad.
I wish I would have been able to present to the public exactly why they charged me. I was told that I would serve 15 years as a felon. I was promised aggravated charges and hostile witnesses if I did not agree to cover up what I found in Burma in 1986 and 1987. I'm going to be about finding prisoners of war. If they won't prosecute me for that, they're certainly going to have the chance.
Can we have the lights, please? I think I missed some. What was it the federal prosecutor said on the courthouse steps? It's important that we covered that segment of this talk because it leads directly into something that I'm going to cover next. The purpose of the importation and sale of illegal drugs to the American people was to finance the alien-connected projects and other black projects which they knew they could not take to Congress for funding. For two reasons. One, everything they were doing was illegal under the Constitution, and Congress could not, in all ethical and moral standards, approve those projects or approve funding. The second reason was they believed, and with some rightfulness, that if they told Congress, it would be the same as telling the public. What happened next, a few years later, is of profound significance. It is one of the most heinous crimes that this secret government has ever committed and ranks, in my estimation, right alongside the sale of drugs to our children. And that is the assassination of the President of the United States. There have been 3 presidents who have left office directly because of action of MJ-12, one of them by murder, assassination, however you want to dub it, it's all the same thing. President John F. Kennedy found out somehow that the CIA was behind the drug smuggling and the sale of drugs to the American people, and if you'll remember correctly, that was the years that the hippie movement began and the flower children began to come out. And they were looking for answers because they were disillusioned. And one of the answers where they found solace was drugs. And President Kennedy was a very idealistic man. I think when he took the presidency, he fully intended to play the game until he discovered the weight of the position and the importance of the position and the trust that the American people placed in the president. And I sincerely believe that he and his brother sat down and decided that that was going to be the first honest presidency. They attempted to get rid of corporate crime, organized crime. He attempted to do things right. He was idealistic. He was charismatic. The people followed him. They loved him. We still love him. What happened to him was a terrible blow. I was sitting in a barracks. I had what you call the watch. And part of the watch was so boring that I was actually watching television. And what I was watching was the Kennedy motorcade in Dallas, and I was on an Air Force base called Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. And what I saw was a man whom I believed in with all my heart, struck down in the street by a hail of bullets in a most undignified manner. And I cried, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. The tears came out of my eyes and I couldn't stop them. And I felt a great emptiness in my chest, and I knew at that moment that the world had changed and would never again be the same for me. And it never has. But I didn't know then what I was to learn later. What I was to learn later is I read in documents prepared by the Office of Naval Intelligence, and how did they know? Because they had a part in it. President Kennedy was ordered to be assassinated by MJ-12 because he had discovered that the CIA was importing and selling drugs to our children, and he ordered them to stop it. And he told them, if you don't stop it, you're going to be sorry, because I'll stop it and you'll all pay the price. Well, they didn't like that, and they knew they would lose a lot of money. They knew they would not be able to accomplish their objectives. The second thing he told them is, I want you to implement a plan to reveal the presence of aliens on this earth to the American people within the following year. They didn't like that either, and they thought it was premature. They had already done a study which indicated that the American people would panic, that the panic would lead into anarchy, which would cause the collapse of the government, that our religious structure would collapse, that a large segment of the people would begin worshiping the aliens, that our economy would collapse, the stock market would collapse. They had doom and gloom and dark clouds for everything. I don't believe that will happen. And it certainly, in my estimation, did not justify the murder of the President of the United States. The murder was carried out in Dallas by teams which consisted of the United States Navy, which was to take care of the body, make sure that the autopsy was done in a manner that would not disclose the true facts. The body was kept under surveillance and custody of the United States Navy the whole time, was taken to a naval hospital. Most of these people involved were attached to naval intelligence. It involved Division 5 of the FBI, who was training people, assassination teams, to go into Cuba and assassinate Fidel Castro. It involved the Secret Service and the CIA. When the long-range shots missed, and there were many more shots fired than anything that you've heard before, Kennedy was struck by a bullet in the back, which exited through his neck, or excuse me, was struck in the front of the neck, which exited through his back, I'm sorry. Governor Connolly was struck with 2 separate shots. Another shot hit the windshield of the vehicle and broke it, and you can see that in the films. And we have blown these frames up many times, and we have studied it for countless hours. And we have put it together with the information that I saw in the documents, and we know exactly what happened. We know that Governor Connolly was carrying a gun. And when he was hit, he started yelling, "Oh my God, they're going to kill us all." And as he turned around in the blow-ups, you can clearly see him reach into his jacket and begin to take out a pistol. And then you lose sight of what happens with that pistol. It may have been the shot from his gun that hit the window, but we don't know that for sure. We do know that the passenger Secret Service agent by the name of Kellerman. I call him Killerman. During the motorcade, when you blow the frames up, you can see him watching Kennedy through his rearview mirror on the right-hand outside of the car. You can see it clearly. He's sitting there and his eyes are watching Kennedy in that rearview mirror the whole time. When Kennedy is struck in the throat, he watches for a few more seconds, then he turns around, he verifies it, he turns back to the front, he passes something to the driver, who is William Greer. They seem to converse for a second. He then goes back to his position. William Greer then glances. Then Kellerman leans over, takes the wheel. William Greer pulls, with his left hand, pulls up, and you can see it clearly. He pulls up a pistol, turns, and over his right shoulder, shoots Kennedy directly in the head. Kennedy's head then snaps backward. Jacqueline Kennedy looks at her husband. You can see her eyes go from her husband and look directly at William Greer, and then she attempts to get out of the car. She is afraid. Throughout all my combat experience, that is exactly what you do. You run away from the fire, not into it. What you see in the John Wayne movies is BS. I never saw one soldier ever run into a machine gun. You run away from the machine gun, and then you figure out how to get that machine gun nest. You don't just run up there and die. That's for the Marines. If there are any ex-Marines in the crowd, I certainly do not intend to slight you. The Marines are probably one of the bravest group of men that we have in this country. However, how they ever get the courage to get out of a small boat and run up on a beach and die so that someone else can run up behind them and lay down and use that body for cover, I will never know. But they do it, and that's to their credit, because we wouldn't be free if they didn't. But anyway, that's what prompted that remark. I've seen this happen, and it amazes me. What happened next was that both men in the front seat hunched down. The car speeds up out of sight. During the time when William Greer is actually shooting Kennedy, the car comes to almost a complete stop, which is exactly what a driver would do if someone else is holding the wheel and he's turning around to shoot someone. You would remove your foot from the accelerator. We have tried this, and it's exactly what people do instinctively. They don't even think about it, it just happens. The film that you normally view when they show it to you on television is speeded up many times so that everything happens real fast. You're always looking at Kennedy. You don't even detect that the car slows down, and you never look at the driver, so you wouldn't see it anyway. But just to take a precaution, they cut a few clips out there, so even if you did think to look at the driver, you still wouldn't see it. But in the film I'm going to show you tonight, we got those clips. Now, when I saw those documents, it said in the documents that the act was plainly visible in the film that was withheld from the public. Not too long ago, on the Ted Koppel late night thing, I forget what you call that. What's it called? Nightline, that's right. Ted Koppel, in answer to all the controversy, the new controversy about Kennedy's death, assassination, said, oh, but there was only one film taken in Dallas. He lied because he knew that there were three. Everyone knows that there is three. There's three in the Warren Commission report. He intentionally lied, knowing that most of the American people will take his word for it without even checking, and if they thought it was three before, will think they were mistaken, not Ted Koppel. Ted Koppel is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Stop listening to the nightly news. They're lying to you. The best thing that you can ever do is turn your television off or burn it or give it to little Johnny, who has a screwdriver and needs something to play with. What happened next is they took the body to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. It was illegal to remove the body. No autopsy was taken there. The doctors were ordered by the FBI and were actually interfered with. They were told not to attempt to determine the path of the projectiles through the body. They were told to get the body ready for shipment as quickly as possible when it was determined that they could not save Kennedy's life. There was no investigation done in Dallas at all. The doctors did draw sketches of what they saw, and they did make reports of what they saw immediately following and during the incident. Now, if you understand the human mind and you understand the way the legal process works, those reports are legal documents and should stand up in any court of law or any investigation because they were done at the scene by professionals who were qualified to make those determinations. Photographs were even taken, but the photographs taken at Parkland Hospital disappeared, so that there was only the doctor's reports and the drawings left. The body left Parkland Hospital in an ornate bronze casket, was taken to Washington, D.C. Somehow the body got out of that casket on the aircraft, and we know exactly how it was done. When Jacqueline Kennedy was taken forward to participate in the swearing-in ceremony of Lyndon Baines Johnson, the Naval Intelligence officers removed Kennedy's body from the bronze casket, passed it down into the baggage compartment, where it stayed like a sack of potatoes until they landed in Washington, D.C. When they landed in Washington, D.C., we have tracked down someone who was on the other side of the plane who also took a film of a military helicopter, a naval helicopter to be exact, or I should say a Marine helicopter, but that's part of the Navy, landed on that side of the plane near the galley door, and something was taken out of the plane and put in that helicopter, which we now know was Kennedy's body. It was flown to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and it arrived there a full 30 minutes before the casket which left Parkland Hospital arrived there. President Kennedy's brain was removed, and another brain that was undamaged was substituted in its place. Why? Because if they had performed an autopsy on the brain that was really actually President Kennedy's brain, they would have found that he was hit from the front, that it was an exploding pellet and not a bullet, and they would have found fragments of that pellet, and they would have found large amounts of toxic shellfish poison in the brain, which was exploded into the brain when this pellet did its thing. And it would have said, CIA, 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 because the CIA had that type of weapon at that time, and it was well known. When they finished doing that, they surgically repaired the wounds to make it look like he was hit from behind, and then they took photographs of these repairs. Then they took the body in to be autopsied as if it had come out of the bronze casket. They also altered the throat wound. We know this. Kennedy's brain was taken out of the room where all this occurred on a gurney, covered with a cloth, and when people asked what that was, being wheeled down the hall and the gurney covered with the cloths, because everybody wanted to know what the hell was going on, they were told that a woman had delivered a stillborn baby, and that was the stillborn baby. It was not, it was Kennedy's brain. Checking the records and doing thorough research, we have found out that there was no stillborn baby in Bethesda Naval Hospital on that day, or the day before, or the day after. Witnesses asked what the other casket was doing in the room. They were told that an Army colonel had died and the casket was prepared for him because he had died that day and the family had requested a quick burial. Checking the records, an Army colonel had not died in that hospital. In fact, no one had died in that hospital that day, and an Army colonel had not died in that hospital for some time. I don't hold much hope for William Greer talking, but I want him to talk. I don't want him killed. I want that man to talk. I want him to become a man and talk. I want the rest of these so-called men and patriots in our government to become real men and real patriots and start talking. Because right now, I'm going to tell it in front of you, I'll tell it in front of the world, I'll tell it in front of the government. Our top military commanders are cowards and they are traitors. The men who represent us are cowards and traitors, and they're all afraid to talk. They're scared to death to talk. They'll let the country go down the tubes before they'll stand up and do what a man should do. And what our history demands that any man who calls himself a patriot do. Stand up and talk and tell the truth. And I'm going to continue, and I'm going to ask that you continue with some of the things that I'm going to ask you to do tonight when you leave here over the next few days and into the next year. I'm going to ask you to continue until we clean up this government, until it gets back to a government of, for, and by the people. Now I'm going to show you the Kennedy assassination tape. I want you to watch it very closely. And if you can't see it, we'll run it again. And if you still can't see it, we'll run it again. I don't care how long it takes, because you need to know this. You need to know who killed your president, and you need to know why. And you need to be incensed, you need to be outraged, you need to know that you have the power to do something about it, and then you've got to do it. You have to do it. And I'm going to give you this challenge. If you can't do it, you ought to go live in another country. Let me see here.
Nearly 25 years ago, the people of the United States and the world were shattered by the impact of an assassin's bullet upon the helpless, unsuspecting young President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Watch the driver, not Kennedy!
Bullets has penetrated deeply into the body and soul of America, destroying the very lives of thousands and the heart and trust and political will of literally millions. And the years that have passed since this tragic event removed from the world stage perhaps one of the most promising human agents of peace and progressive political development, we have been fed one officially sanctioned lie after another, beginning with a blue ribbon cover-up commission to a castrated Senate Select Committee seeking to shed light upon an event deliberately enshrouded in deception, concealment, and outright falsehood. 25 years is long enough. It is time the truth was finally told, in the earnest hope that it will truly set us free of the murderers who pose as our protectors. What we're observing here is the motorcade in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. As the presidential car passes behind the freeway sign, President Kennedy is struck in the throat by a bullet that was fired from the grassy knoll. As he's grasping his throat, John Connally is turning around to his right. He at that point is struck. You notice the the passenger of the car turning back to see what has happened to the president. As he turns back to the front, the driver of the car turns with his left arm over his right shoulder with a pistol and fires. You see the 45 caliber nickel-plated automatic weapon in his left hand. He's firing over his right shoulder. You see it in relief. You see his head pointing backwards towards the president. And this enhanced
Watch her
close-up
eyes, she looks right at Greer.
of the bullet upon the president. The force of the shot drives him violently backward against the back of the seat. You see Miss Kennedy react in horror. The ugly gaping wound, which is evident here, according to many observers at the scene, was actually created on the print. This was not the actual nature of the wound. But you notice that Mrs. Kennedy wasted no time in trying to exit the vehicle because she clearly was able to determine exactly where that shot had originated, and it was her personal bodyguard, Clint Hill, another Secret Service agent, who attempted to keep her in. What the arrow is indicating here is what appears to be the outline of a man, a hat, and his rifle. The arrow is pointing to the rifle barrel of the man in the bushes who possibly was the rifleman on the grassy knoll who fired that shot. Another view taken by another photographer. Again, you see Mrs. Kennedy trying to exit the vehicle from behind, being pushed back in by her bodyguard. A number of witnesses on the scene rushing towards the vehicle. This section, the man standing on the far right of the wall there is Abraham Zapruder, the photographer who took the original photos. The arrow here is indicating what was very likely the rifleman on the grassy knoll, the man who fired the shot which penetrated Kennedy's throat from the front, not from behind as the Warren Commission would have you believe. Very interesting note also that the motorcycle policemen were told to remain behind the car at all times. Here you see the passenger in the front turning back, looking at the president. Instead of jumping back to assist him, he turns forward. The driver is now rotating. The weapon comes into view and he fires. You'll see this repeatedly in these sequences. Kennedy's been shot in the throat. He's leaning to his left. The driver now begins to rotate. His left arm comes over his right shoulder and he fires now. Again, you see the driver rotate. You see the weapon coming into view. He's rotating again. The weapon is in view. He fires. You can clearly see his head turning and his arm and the weapon extending into view over his right shoulder. Many of the witnesses indicated that the car slowed almost to a virtual halt at about this point. And here in the normal version, you see how much more quickly to speed it up. It's much harder to determine. Many of the people who asked the question, why Jackie Kennedy?